Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Nucco Brain-hosted event, Thinking Outside the Box, Your Activity Within Corporate Compliance. I am Stefano Marrone. I'm the founder and MD of Nucco Brain. I'm going to do a very brief presentation about what we do, and then we can delve into our panel discussion with our lovely speaker. First of all, thank you so much for being here and being available, guys. Thanks for your time. Let's, without further ado, start. Nucco Brain, it's a visual storytelling studio. Our job is to tell the story of our clients in a visual way, and we particularly focus on dealing with the complexity and seemingly complicated topics to make them engaging and interesting. We have 4 verticals in terms of the services. We do quite a lot of internal comms. We do learning and development, content, and then we do what we call branded content, so external type of communication with a focus on turning brands into publishers. All of this we do with a classic type of content such as videos, infographics, written content, and so on. But we also have a very specific type of services that revolve around XR, so VR, AR, and all type of mixed reality and interactive content. So we proud ourselves into being able to move from classic type of content to very technologically edgy one, and we're part of the Uni9 group that last year won Production Company of the Year, and this year is on the campaign shortlist for the Best Agency of the Year. So we're lucky enough to have the production capabilities of such a great award-winning group behind our back. Our clients, as you can see, are we like the variety and the fact that so many of them trust us. I think that given today topic, working with professional services and banking companies and pharma companies and the government, such with clients like UKRI and European space agencies are particularly relevant examples of the clients that we work with. So I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the cases when we had to deal with compliance very closely for some of the projects that we work on, and then I will pass the word on to our panelists. So today, if you want to follow us and tweet us any type of question, you can follow us at Nucco Brain. It's the same basically on all channels, pretty easy to find. But on Twitter, if you hashtag creativity within compliance and Nucco Brain events, you will be able to ask us question. You can also ask us question in the little Q&A box that is in your bottom part of the screen, and we will try to integrate them in the conversation as we speak. And of course, we have collected questions before by some of the people that are coming to the event. They were kind enough to send us information prior to this. So let's take a look at some of the project that were done when thinking about corporate compliance. The biggest example that we have that I think is pretty relevant is a work we've done with Deloitte in the GCC. The contract to help implement VAT. VAT as a regulation didn't exist in the GCC. It was not. It was never being applied, and we had the interesting job to work together with with Deloitte on one side, the finance ministry of the GCC on the other, to make sure that we could explain very clearly what VAT implied for people in the GCC and businesses, but also make sure that the communication between Deloitte and the Ministry of Finance was smooth. We helped them from the get-go, starting with pitching the job from the Deloitte side, and then once the consultancy part was finished, we ended up creating all sorts of educational material for businesses and the wider public. Another good example of us dealing with quite a lot of regulation, and specifically with the, I would say, finer details of international translations, was when we created content and an engagement campaign for private investors for HSBC, for the China's Belt and Road Initiative. It was an entire campaign made of several infographics and videos, and we had to make sure that what we said was not only culturally appropriate and right for several types of countries, but also that it was compliant both from the European side, particularly UK, and of course the Chinese side. A different level of engagement with compliance is the work that we are currently doing with UKRI, UK Research and Investment. They have quite a lot of scientific information about COVID-19 that they have to share with the general population, but with a particular eye to organizations such as hospital and health organization. So it's very important for us to make sure that we comply with what is approved information from a government point of view, but also from the Ministry of Health. So we did quite a lot of very quick work to make sure that we put out video, infographics, and other content that was related to COVID-19 and is still ongoing. It's actually quite an interesting project where we learn quite a lot as we work on it. And another good example is our work with Merck, where we recently did a video campaign about biosimilars. And the idea here is, like, when you deal with patents related to specific medications and chemical patents, and we really want to make sure that you get your information right. So there is quite a thorough process of compliance in that case, and we made sure to work very closely with the experts, and that we work with what we call SMEs, so social matter experts, to make the compliance process as quick as possible. So this is just a little bit of breadth of the type of projects that we do. At Nucco, we can maybe, Alistair is going to speak in a little bit about some of his personal experiences, but without further ado, let me introduce you to Hilary Taylor. That is our marketing strategist, will be our moderator from now on, and she's going to do introductions of our speakers. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. We are super lucky today to have this panel of experts talking us through compliance, but both from a compliance and insurance perspective, but also from a creative perspective. So I'm going to let the speakers introduce themselves and their experience when it comes to creative and compliance, and then we'll jump right into the discussion. As Stefano said, I just want to remind you, if you do have any questions during the discussion, feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure that they get answered at the end. We will have 10 minutes for Q&A at the end as well. So panelists, can you please introduce yourself, your role, and tell us how internal and external compliance regulations affect your day-to-day? Claire, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'm Claire Templeton. I'm a media and entertainment specialist underwriter at Beazley Insurance Group. My clients include publishers, broadcasters, influencers, ad agents, studios around the world. Compliance regs don't apply to me per se day to day. Where that comes across my desk would be in the event of a claim from one of my clients.
Perfect. Caroline, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'm Caroline Flanagan. I'm a senior legal project manager with Clifford Chance, a multinational law firm. And in my role, obviously working in the legal sector, it's a heavily regulated industry. So within my day-to-day, it's both internal compliance and also meeting those external regulations that have an impact on how I act in my day-to-day role.
Perfect. Francesca?
Hi, I'm Francesca. I'm a senior marketing manager at NatWest. I work across NatWest Ventures, which is the innovation arm of NatWest, and we have a number of digital kind of propositions that go out to the SME market. And essentially, through the different propositions, we'll be communicating to customers. So internal and external compliance around what we can and can't say is really important.
And then Al, do you want to introduce yourself?
Of course. Hello, I'm Alistair Robertson. I sort of lead the creative and strategy teams here at Nucco. I'm kind of a career Adland creative, so I've worked in Adland most of my career. And until last year, I was actually in the States for 10 years as well. So I came back and joined Nucco about a year ago. How compliance affects my life, I mean, it depends on what day it is. Some days it's the territory that completely spoils everything I've ever wanted to make and do. But other days it's also the guiding sort of regulations that actually allow us to actually get work out. So as we'll get into later on, it's become an increasingly important and better understood part of the marketing process, I think.
Perfect, especially within the B2B space that we sit in as well. So just to kind of set the scene, we're going to start with a question about your compliance process. So can you explain a bit about what your compliance process looks like for each of you, because it will be different, and if from your perspective these processes change in every organization, or if they're quite consistent across different organizations. Anyone can start.
I can start. From an insurance perspective, day to day, obviously I'm the boring insurance person, so I'm not creative in any shape or form, I'm afraid. So it doesn't really affect me day to day. But what I see is my clients' compliance procedures in conjunction with their legal procedures. And I do see these varying from organisation to organisation. We're looking for clear, joined up approaches, the importance of the understanding between the creativity teams and the compliance officers and the legal teams. So although I'm not in it, I certainly see different versions of it across different firms worldwide.
I think I would echo that. You know, in the legal sector, the same rules apply to all the law firms, but it's who and how they're applied internally that differs. And also then working with clients, as Claire said, you can see a range of variants going through the businesses that we work with.
Yeah, I'd say definitely from my perspective, having worked across kind of banking and insurance, as well as wealth management, it's very different from organisation to organisation. I think especially in banking, it's quite strict around what we will and won't say, and what especially internally we feel comfortable kind of going out to market saying. So I think it definitely differs between industries. And
from my point of view, I think I've worked in multiple sectors over my career, many different types of organisations. Obviously, the consumer care territory, and that was to me probably the most obviously legally bound, and the need for compliance was huge there. But I think one of the things we can get into as we go, I think it's a really interesting fact is that no matter what business or sector you're in nowadays, whether it's professional services or B2B in any respect, or even consumer marketing nowadays, the level of compliance has stepped up considerably. And I spent some time working with the McDonald's clients in the States as well. And you guys wouldn't believe the level of legal and compliance that still goes into much of the broadcasting, and much of the communications that even they bring up. So it really is. It's a hugely hot topic across the industry, and no matter the sector, I think it's the processes are getting more and more strict in many ways, but I think that also leads to better advertising in many ways as well.
Perfect. That actually leads really well into our next question, which is what opportunities does working in a regulated environment bring, if any, and how can these opportunities help you think differently or creatively outside of the box when you are communicating within compliance restrictions?
So from my perspective, working especially in marketing, communications, and trying to be creative is quite, sometimes having compliance brings a number of challenges. However, that's where we try and be a little bit more innovative, because bearing in mind, like whether it be on social media, out and about, we have a few seconds to grab our consumers' attention, and with the restrictions that we have, that can be quite difficult. Looking at kind of our NatWest Ventures and the different brands that have sprung up to be a little bit more innovative, we've had to kind of buck the trend and be more creative. So one of the ventures that I work on is called Esme Loans, and that provides small business loans to businesses across the UK. If you look at the brand that we've created versus the competitors out there, we decided to take a very different look and feel to cut through. Traditional banking can be quite blue, it can be quite corporate, there's a certain type of language that people tend to talk to people when it comes to banking. And so what we try to do is talk to SMEs in a really kind of down-to-earth human way, but also create a really distinct brand presence to cut through in what is a very blue space, really.
Perfect. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah.
So yeah, I think Francesca's hit on a brilliant point there. It's the job of the creative to solve the problem. I always think, I'm a great believer that people who like me who've done this for all right. It's our job to like take on the challenge, never to shy away from it. And I love to hear Francesca talk about things like that. Just like the acknowledgement that some territories have difficulties is of course 100% true. How you then use that issue to provide a better canvas for yourself to grow is entirely the challenge. I mean, it's one of the more interesting things that I think we as Nucco do. I think it's, again, I've worked across many different sectors and done a lot of consumer marketing in the past as well, but I still find the challenges that B2B provides and professional services and very heavily compliant areas provide, actually they're the ones that deliver sometimes the best creative opportunities and the ones that make you think more than anything. I mean, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I'm a very keen watcher of the industry, and therefore I've been involved in a lot of the award shows over the years as well. And it's really interesting to see even how the award shows have begun to reflect that over the last couple of decades. So 20 years ago, no one cared about work from banks or pharma or all that sort of stuff. Nowadays, it's often the most cutting edge, leading work that wins most of the awards. And I only mention creativity awards not from a sort of a blanket, isn't it important to win awards? There is real science behind creative awards that suggests if you do great work, then you do get better business results as well. So it is a really good measure, and it's become really apparent through the award shows just how the difficulty in marketing something can be the springboard into genuinely brilliant work that blows away the competition, but also sets new levels for different sectors.
I think we see that in the legal sector. You're rarely going to be driving along the road behind a bus plastered with a law firm's advertisement. And that kind of permeates through from graduate recruitment. How do you get the best grads if they're not aware of your brand? And so it is those really savvy ways of creating a brand without kind of the traditional advertisements that will differentiate people.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is where the topic for this event even came from. It's just such a huge opportunity to be creative, even within that space of using digital, or which we'll kind of get to, but what other tools can you use to kind of push the creative boundaries as well. So on the compliance side, how can you communicate your value internally and importance to the business? How do you market compliance to internal stakeholders? And do you find you get a lot of pushback?
As a legal project manager, so I sit somewhere between our business side and our legal side within a law firm. And so quite often we're that interface, bringing together our lawyers who are delivering legal services to our clients and our business professionals who are ensuring that we kind of meet the background requirements. And I wouldn't say pushback is the right word, but sometimes when people don't know why you're asking them to do something in a certain way, it's that why question. And I think that's where that sort of initial upfront thinking from the compliance side is, how do you communicate the why before you're asked, rather than just saying you have to do A, B, and C. If you can paint a little bit more of a story to say, we're going to do A, B, and C because, I find that people are much less likely to say, I don't want to do A, B, and C.
Do you have any examples, Caroline, of having done that before?
I mean, we've got, strict rules around who our clients need to be. And if clients decide, actually, we want to change our client entity. So, company A has a subsidiary and they want the subsidiary to be the client. That's not a simple process for us just to change the client. Obviously there's anti-money laundering, KYC that needs to go on. And actually, if we can explain firstly to our internal stakeholders, so our lawyers, but also our clients, the importance of why we're asking certain questions, it makes that process a lot smoother. And so now, we're told to ask up front, are you sure this is the entity that you want to have on the client agreement? And then the client has to stop and think as well. So again, it's having that information brought up front to people's front of mind makes it a lot easier for us.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And then Claire, I would love to understand if you have any pushback from an insurance side. Have you had any experience kind of having to sell the importance of insurance from your side?
gosh, I have to sell the importance of insurance on a daily basis most of the time. Nobody wants to talk about or buy insurance. It's the boring part. So, but I was fascinated with the things that Caroline was saying, because the people I talk to, so we have a broad range of clients, and then the people we talk to are the likes of Caroline, because we talk to the compliance and the crossover between legal. And I completely get where she's coming from, because we're trying to put across the importance of what is insured and what isn't insured. And I think sometimes media clients struggle to understand the difference of on what they can get cover for. And something important to point out is that regulatory fines or penalties are not covered by any PI insurance, that they're a final penalty, and it's intended to be a punishment for something that you've not adhered to, you've not done. And so that it sort of reinforces even more the importance of working with your compliance team, because in the event that you don't do what is your, you don't do the ABC that Caroline said about, and then you proceed and your campaign goes out and then something happens, you don't have the comfort or the reassurance that your insurance policy will cover that, because that isn't an insurable interest. What we are looking to cover, and what we do cover day in, day out, is the legal complaints that come around. So the traditional things like the defamation, the copyright claims, the privacy issues. So that is all covered by your PI insurance, but the fines or penalties arising from regulatory defence isn't covered. Most PI insurance policies do have some sublimit for regulatory defence. So in the event that you've followed Caroline's A, B, and C rules, you do this, but still something comes about, you might want to argue that point, and you might think, actually, no, we did do everything we were told, and we'd like to take that a bit further. Some PI policies, ours, for example, has a £10,000 sublimit for regulatory defence costs. So if you want to proceed that way, you can. If you're really confident that you've listened to your compliance managers and your legal team and you've checked, there is that cover. But it's not in every single PI insurance policy. So it is something worth checking for a media client.
That's good to know. If there is pushback, cover yourself. So then from a marketing and creative side, what strategies do you have for influencing your stakeholders, so your kind of compliance stakeholders, and getting them on board with adding creativity, so coming at it from the other side?
I think what is key to this is kind of making sure that you bring compliance in early, especially when it comes to creating campaigns, is really just to get them on board as part of the journey, as opposed to creating a campaign and looping them in at the end as an afterthought. Because, if you do that, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to have to start again, or there's lots of things that you haven't considered as part of your kind of creative campaign process. And I think what's really key as well is just making sure that everybody is clear of what the objectives of said marketing activity is, because sometimes we can just jump straight in and say, we want to do this campaign, what do you think, without really explaining what is it we're trying to do with that campaign. And I think once compliance teams are aware of the objectives, you can kind of align and work quite closely together to deliver the best output.
Interesting. Al, do you have any thoughts on that from kind of a supporting client's perspective?
I mean, I've got to say thank you, Francesca. You just laid me up perfectly. I mean, that's my whole perspective on that. It's like, so, I guess there's a couple of things. If you bear with me, I guess I'm going to take a quick moment to step back. And what I do from an agency point of view is we should always acknowledge that, like a lot of, I think Caroline mentioned before, a lot of competing brands, usually suffer the same issues. So, like, no matter what audience, what market you're in, it's very unlikely that one brand suffers from a compliance issue that the other brand won't. So I think in many ways the same things apply whether you're in a heavily regulated space or you have significant compliance issues to deal with, no matter the sort of market. And so from my point of view, no matter who we're talking to, we have to go through those same exercises, and you have to do it within the context of what you can find out and what you can deliver. But like for me, you've got to always you've got to be able to carve the marketplace, you've got to find your USP, you've got to deliver on the brand promises. And I think the example that keeps coming back to me is, again, when back in the States working for Bayer, and we actually work with Bayer now for Nucco as well. But I think the one that really comes to mind is I used to work and lead a brand called Claritin, and some of you may be aware of Claritin. Now it's in the UK, but it's nowhere near as big a brand in Europe as it is in the States. It's actually $1 billion brand in the States. It's huge, and they come up against competitors like Benadryl and Zyrtec and Allegra. And there's a lot of money for, for anyone that's been in the States. Americans love an allergy, and therefore they love an allergy tablet to go with it as well. So there's an awful lot of money in the space, and Claritin really wanted to be that sort of rock star in that space as well. But truthfully, the issues remain about its efficacy and actually what can be said in public. I mean, I think I'm probably still not allowed to tell people what the things I know about Claritin, but it's an interesting case to make, and things like the ingredient loratadine is, it has efficacy issues. But either way, you still need to carve out that space and the product and service and the brand that you're existing. So in that case, what Francesca was just sort of mentioning there, it's so difficult what you can actually say. The agency and I actively work to create one-on-one relationships with the key members of the compliance and legal teams. And I can't honestly say it was my most loved meeting of the week. I'm not going to pretend. It wasn't like I was running to the legal team and compliance meetings every week, skipping down the corridors. But ultimately, I think everyone understood that if we all linked arms and marched forward together, then that's when we all benefit. And Francesca mentions exactly the thing. I think a lot of the times, from an agency point of view, you can't try and hide away from the legal and compliance teams, but ultimately they're only doing the job they've been asked to do, and ultimately they're protecting the organisation that they're employed by. So, if there's one thing I guess I've learned is, treating that often hidden part of the client organisation as, something that you don't want to deal with, or anything that doesn't do any good for anyone, neither them or us. In fact, acceptance and understanding of each other is incredibly, incredibly vital to a successful campaign. So I guess that's my perception, is that after 20 years of being in agencies, it's better to, I say with everything in life, isn't it? It's better to talk to people and understand their point of view, and then march together, rather than hoping that you'll just sneak one around the side and everything will be fine.
Sneaking one around the side is never a good thing from an insurance perspective.
No, fair enough, Claire. I think you probably know that better than anyone. No, I mean, but from a creative point of view, you often, we as creatives are bred into agencies to push work as far as you can, and to deliver things that clients sometimes feel a little uncomfortable with. And to convince a marketing manager that to feel uncomfortable with something is one thing. To convince a compliance officer or legal team that they should feel confident and comfortable with it is an entirely different thing. And they shouldn't, because if they do, then probably you're in the wrong place, aren't you? Because ultimately someone's going to get sued, or people like you are going to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, sorry, carry on, Hilary. Sorry.
Good. Well, speaking about all of that and kind of bringing it all together, how does the relationship work? Do you have any best practices for building that relationship between marketing and compliance and legal? Do you bring your agency partners in? Al, you mentioned you went to meetings once a week for some of your clients. Is that standard? Is that a best practice?
I don't think that's standard at all. I think that was very much the model that brand specifically did at the time. I was working with the Bayer Corporation just after they'd bought a lot of brands from another pharmaceutical company called Merck, and so there was enormous financial pressure on the business and enormous targets on the back of the marketeers to hit performance targets. And so, to be honest, I think that all bred to that situation where there needed to be quick turnaround and mutual understanding. But I can honestly say that's probably the only time in 25 years of working in the industry that I've ever had a day-to-day one-to-one relationship with those teams.
Hilary, yeah, I'd say from US clients' perspectives, I certainly see a lot more, detailed involvement day to day, or on a weekly basis for higher level projects. The lower level projects, and particularly across the UK, perhaps it's less formalised. It's more of they get towards the end and then they tick it off. But as Francesca said, it's best to get them in there early, which I think is the best thing to do.
Yeah, I think what we try and do at NatWest is, especially if we're doing something new, a little bit outside of our comfort zone, maybe using different formats that haven't been used before, is we have what's called an advice session with our compliance team, and we take them through what we intend to do, kind of get their initial views, just so we can kind of understand, okay, is this something we can do? Can we start to push the boundaries a little bit? And that's typically what we do with very new things, is definitely set up a bespoke meeting and run through, okay, what our plans are, and potentially sometimes we share with them some agency outputs from the early stages, and just see how they land, really.
I think that communication is key, and through that communication what you can do is you can start to build champions in those teams, and they can become your go-to people to facilitate that, rather than having to constantly kind of start afresh and, you know, please, sir, may I, you have a sounding board?
That from Caroline is 100% true. I mean, that's brilliant. I mean, if you, you know, whether you're an internal marketer or the agency coming to you guys, if you've got someone you already know, and it's not that they, you know, you expect them to be less lenient, you know, less, you know, more lenient with you or anything like that, or more stringent in any way. It's just being able to have an open, honest, frank conversation from day one. I mean, it's the same with everything in life, really, isn't it? The more people talk, the more you get to understand each other, and therefore you can move forward more quickly together.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so this question's for Francesca specifically, and it's around messaging, and how do you focus specifically on messaging and remaining compliant in your copywriting within your campaigns?
Yeah, so this is obviously everything that we do needs to be clear, fair, and not misleading, which can be sometimes quite subjective. You know, what a marketer wants to say versus what our compliance team think we should be saying can at times be very, very different. So we just need to carefully consider everything that we put out, put the customer first, really. But what we're trying to do is, you know, traditionally banks used to go out with quite old-fashioned communications, and I think we're starting to put the customer first and kind of understand what's their preference in the way that they want to be communicated to, and how do we do it in an innovative and differentiated way. But I think it is very much a balancing act. It's like, okay, we from a marketing perspective want to say certain things. We need to say certain things from a compliance perspective. We need to make sure that the customer has all of the information, and therefore, you know, we really do need to make sure that everything is balanced and coming across in the correct way. So yeah, it's quite tricky at times.
And then Al, do you want to talk a bit about how we work as clients, or in your past you've worked with clients to help them think creatively and think outside the box, maybe not even knowing their compliance restrictions?
Yeah, I mean, like I said right at the start, you know, sometimes compliance has been my best friend, and other days it's really not. I mean, I could talk endlessly about Claritin, and I won't, because it's just one example. But there are other brands even within the pharma and healthcare space, and, you know, at Nucco we work with Merck, and we've worked with Bayer and all those things. I used to work with the Dr. Scholl's brand, which again was part of a takeover in the US, and it was part of a much bigger corporate redesign by Bayer. And I always remember going through a 3-day workshop, which honestly at the time was probably the worst 3 days of my entire life. But it was basically, we tried to reframe the entire brand over a period of 3 days. And it was interesting that the agency I was working in the States, we used to bring in a multitude of different clients within the 3 days, and we would talk. You would take people through the individual parts of the process, and that was one of the only other times that I've actually had compliance and the legal teams come and join a creative process more quickly, simply because the whole sense of the 3 days was to push very hard, very quick, to get the Dr. Scholl's brand, which needed a new tagline and a new whole new look and feel, and a whole brand purpose delivered. And so it was felt that if we did it quickly with lots of people around very quickly, it could happen quicker. And so yeah, I remember the legal and compliance teams coming in there. I mean, ultimately, you know, compliance can kill an idea. You know, let's be absolutely clear about that. There's nothing wrong with that, because again, if it kills an idea because it's, you know, not the right thing to say, then that's the job of the organisation. That's the job of that part of the organisation. You know, so from a creative point of view, yeah, it has been difficult at times. But again, I guess I'm old enough and more grown up enough now. And when I was 25, I'd have told you something totally different. I'd have told you that, you know, companies should do whatever I tell them to do. But ultimately, that's somewhat changed over the years. And you have a level of maturity, and you actually start to understand the needs of the individuals within the organisation, so the clients, and what they need for their businesses as well. And within all of that, yeah, you know, you begin to work more carefully and more thoughtfully in the environments that you are in. So absolutely, I've lost 1,000 good ideas to compliance and legal teams. I've lost probably 100,000 great lines because it was just not quite the right thing to say. But on the other hand, I look back to Dr. Scholl's and stuff, and we were trying to, you know, move the brand from just a company that sold insoles, which is, let's face it, is the least sexy thing in the world, No one's marching down the insole aisle of every chemist. That's just not. That's like a dead space to start with. But turn it into a brand that could stand behind claims that it totally brought about a change in people's lives from actually improving their back pain and things like that. You can only imagine that the claim that we wanted to make from the agency point of view was, what, you just say everything, back pain doesn't exist if you wear Dr. Scholl's. So the legal and compliance team's forcing out, you ain't saying that. You're just not saying that. And so you have to work together and you find the middle ground. And we had a successful launch in the States. But again, it all comes down to the fact. And I know I feel like I'm a bleating old bullshit, and I just keep saying the same thing. But honestly, just the communication is, as Caroline mentioned, is absolutely key. And the more horizontal you can have that communication, and the more day to day. And it isn't easy because we're all busy and we've all got our own jobs to do. So it's not like this is some magic brush that everyone talks to everyone, because everyone's got enough emails already. But the more we can sort of tie all the groups together, the quicker the solutions get done. Did any of that actually make sense, or did I just go off on one? I'm not entirely sure any of that.
It makes sense. We actually had a question from the audience that I think applies really well here, around copy and the message. Is there a rule for the amount of information that can go into your comms? So how do you decide what is the key message and what goes into the fine print? Claire, you might have a good perspective on this as well, just from an insurance perspective, what is allowed to go in the fine print or must be there, and how do you manage the balance?
Well, from my perspective, I would refer to people like Caroline. So I would always look to what the lawyer has said, and boringly, I'm going to be more on the factual side of things than the creative side of things. But I get the balance, and we would never stop a client from being creative. So we would want that. So it goes back to what Alistair said, which is to have that really great relationship, and the communication needs to be clear. So if you're driving both forward on the same thing, you get that balance. So I personally would go down the more legal side of things. But provided you've got advice saying that it's balanced and you've got just enough, then that's fine.
So then, Caroline, you might have an approach on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way our teams look at it is that if it's factual and you're only stating things within certain bounds, then things can be backed up with the fine print or links to further data, etc. Where you need to be careful is where you're making obviously things like insinuations. There's a fine line there that I think needs to be tread, but obviously that's the creative side, and I think that's where those conversations become really key.
Yeah, I think from a marketing perspective, especially with financial promotions in our space, is that yes, we need to surface whether it be terms and conditions or eligibility criteria, but we've also got to appreciate the formats that we're doing that in. So if we look at social media, for example, I've had pushback before from compliance teams saying, well, actually, even though this is a 15-second video, what we would like you to do at the end is present the equivalent of 15 seconds worth of terms and conditions. And I'm like, that's not really how social media works. And I think sometimes it's about explaining the formats to the compliance team. If you've got a 15-second animation talking about your key kind of USPs, and then you follow up with all of this jargon and legal things, it can be quite off-putting to a customer. So it's making sure whether it's, absolutely we need to present that information, but how do we do it? And, is it a link through to a web page to find out more? So it's just kind of considering those things as well.
Everything that Francesca just said. When we come against that every single time. Let's face it, we're all in the thumb roll, the thumb scroll world, and if you got 2 seconds to get someone's attention, probably leading with a legal and compliance line isn't probably going to get the results you wanted to. But also it's tough, isn't it? So then you have to find a way to make sure that the organisation is protected against anyone who does decide that there's an issue that they want to take forward.
That's where having the champions comes into play here, because if you've got someone on a previous campaign who's familiar with 15-second social media grabs, they know that there's no point in going over old ground and saying, actually, what you have to have is an equal 15 seconds of terms and conditions. So going back to those champions, it really helps that if you sort of, after each campaign, you keep the same people.
I always remember there was one ad that we did it's a TV spot that we did for Claritin in the States that the T's and C's at the bottom of the screen were something like about 6 lines long. Everything had to be obviously compliant that you could read it. So in the end, we had these huge supers, and it's this like 6 lines of like T's and C's at the bottom, which is just like, I'm not quite sure why we're doing this anymore. We might as well just put the T's and C's on the screen and be done with it, to be honest. But yeah, I'm sure lots of you have come across similar issues in the past as well.
Definitely. All right, so the big question, how can you measure the return on investment of creativity? And if there are any other stories about taking a creative leap of faith and seeing it come through, maybe proving, like if you had a compliance team that was a bit nervous at the beginning and you kind of proved to them that it was worth the investment, any stories like that around this. But how do you prove or measure the ROI of creativity?
From my perspective, I think creativity should really drive differentiation and therefore cut through, and in turn will increase your brand awareness. So if you've got a campaign that really is driving cut through in a space, your brand's going to be everywhere. You know, I hate to use this, the term viral, because I've had, CMOs or marketing directors go, make this go viral. And that's just the worst thing you can ever say, because that's never going to happen if you say it. I think, but if you do drive differentiation and your content is getting shared or your campaigns are getting shared, that's really where your ROI comes from. And especially within NatWest Ventures in the innovation space, we do a lot of test and learn. So what we like to try and do is fail fast. So if something's not working, let's drop it, move on, try something different. And I think a test and learn approach is also really, really useful.
Perfect.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, again, from my point of view, Francesca, it sounds like you take a very similar route to many of the clients that we have, and I've worked with in the past as well. I mean, I think the test and learn thing is a very interesting thing. Again, it's a very different example, well outside this space. But I actually used to work with the PepsiCo quite a lot, and of all things, I always remember a campaign for Quaker Oats where they had a lot of health claims they wanted to attach to the brand. Oats are very good for heart health and digestion and that sort of stuff. You can tell I did my learning there, and energy and all those things. But even the compliance and legal stuff that went with that, we used to create ads on a very, very quick basis, test and learn, dump the ones we want. And we had what we call micro audiences as well. So it was a very highly targeted campaign that sort of went to very specific audiences. And that's one thing we haven't discussed here at all, is how media plays into all of this as well, of course. And it's a hugely important part. Creativity is very helpful, but unless you're getting the right message to the right person at the right time, it's kind of all purposeless. But yeah, everything you just said really resonates with me as well.
That's a good segue into our next question, which is, let's talk about digital and resources and platforms. So within a regulated industry, does digital give you more scope to be creative, social media, different media platforms, or is it actually a burden, a benefit or a burden using digital?
I personally think that digital is the way forward. That's where our customers are now. That's what people are using. So it has to be seen as a opportunity. Yes, it can be challenging at times with the formats. If you're looking at whether it be social media, videos, or even banner ads, there's not much space really to, number one, get your message across, let alone the compliance messages that we also have to kind of incorporate and consider. But I think looking at kind of the future, kind of augmented reality, AI, hopefully in the future, marketing will be completely different, and we won't need to target people that we think are in the market for, say, a business loan. What we'll do is we'll know that person is at the point of need of a business loan. And so marketing will change and become much more personalized. And instead of, marketing for months and the run up to somebody, we'd be like, well, we know on this day that this person will be considering taking a business loan. So therefore let's surface our adverts at the right time, and it will become a lot more intelligent.
Absolutely. I mean, especially in a B2B space, I guess, no one's going out there making TV ads for people. And yeah, let's face it, we've all seen it. There's not a massive decrease in television advertising spend, but there's obviously a different media consumption going on in the world nowadays. We all need to be mining the digital channels, and that's not just even us as an agency. We continue to do that as well. Digital has the ability to micro-target audiences, just like Francesca, you were sort of saying there, and be there at the time of need. Hopefully, it means that one day we'll end up not being followed around the internet with ads once because if we know that they're in the time of need, hopefully we'll also know that they've also purchased at some point as well, so that we're not all followed by around the internet with shoe ads that we've already bought a pair of shoes for. But on the other hand, that absolutely digital channels is the way forward. And I'm not a big believer that TV will completely disappear, because I still think there'll be some shows which are, what the term appointment viewing comes to mind. But aside from that, the vast majority of advertisers, digital and its ability to micro-target will be the future of the industry.
Now, so Caroline and Claire, kind of same question, but I guess internally. So Caroline, when does digital help in implementing new processes or submitting claims and that kind of thing? Is that helpful from an internal compliance perspective as well?
Absolutely. I mean, if I think internally, the way I surface my information tends to be, for example, through our intranet. I'm not going looking for a handbook for something that people would have 20 years ago. So you're looking for quick information that you can find with a few key search terms. And digital, even from a legal perspective, it has become increasingly key since obviously COVID-19. Everybody's working remotely. You start to see use of, more online portals. We're shifting to new ways of working, and all of that comes with its own compliance and regulations, and having that access to everything, so you can just say, okay, can I do X, Y, or Z, and you have an information or an answer in 10 seconds, makes a difference. And because we're all users, we're all Googleites, we want to have that information. You expect that in work, you expect it in compliance, you expect it in legal, and if you don't get it, you can become quite frustrated. So a lot of work and effort goes into maintaining that and getting it ready, but it has the benefits of a very easy, happy workforce who have that information.
Yeah, I'd say insurance is probably the most old-fashioned, slowest industry. I mean, many of us still get our slipcases and schlep our way over to the Lloyd's building and get a line put down. So it's still very old-fashioned. It's very pinstripe. But COVID has actually forced everybody to be a lot more, digital. Everyone's had to take webinars. We've all got emergency Lloyd's protocols in place so that we can place our business digitally. Also, particularly in the media sector, we need digital platforms, we need online platforms, and so we've been offering, and we work with brokers and clients to offer cover holder positions where we give them the underwriting pen for particular sectors of business. We've recently launched a online insurance policy available for influencers, which is is a website, direct to consumer, purchase just on the phone, 4 questions, they answer them, they can click and buy, get their policy documents directly to their phone. They can notify claims via the website and via email as well. So we are old-fashioned, but we are getting there slowly. But particularly in the media sector, we realise that we need to do things more digitally. So having things like these online platforms are, it's quite a large step for us, but we're doing it.
Perfect. One step at a time, right?
Yeah.
All right, so we've got questions flowing in from the attendees, so I'm going to switch over to those. So one here is, how much are you willing to give up the legalese in favor of the clarity of your message? So that kind of...
For me, all of it.
All of it.
I don't think I'm the most qualified person to answer that question, am I?
I think again, though, that's where those relationships really become key, and that upfront conversation around understanding of the messaging. If you can have compliance and legal comfortable with what you're saying, then there are ways and means, I'm sure, where people can come to those compromises.
Yeah, definitely. What KPIs do you use, if any, to measure the effectiveness of your communication?
So from our perspective, it really depends on the media, and the objectives of the campaign. So it could be anything from kind of, brand awareness metrics through to, if it's, digital formats, it would be click-through rates, website visits. So we always have KPIs behind every sort of marketing activity that we do. It's just different across the board.
Okay, I've got another one coming in for Francesca. So you mentioned fail fast. How do you manage those conversations with stakeholders and get them comfortable with failure?
So yeah, this is a tricky one, but I'm quite fortunate because I work within the innovation space, and NatWest are very aware of the fact that, you know, if we don't test new things, if we don't try and do things a little bit differently, that we're going to get left behind, especially with all these digital banks that are kind of coming along, like, and, you know, doing really, really well. So it is difficult, but what we try and do is mitigate risk, because the majority of our communications are across digital platforms. We can actually get insights really, really quickly versus something like a TV advert, which, you know, you put together is extraordinarily expensive. It then airs, and sometimes, you know, to get feedback in the age of, you know, today's world, yes, you've got social media where you can get feedback, but to generally understand how that type of campaign is landing is very costly, you know, and can take quite some time to get those insights back, versus digital, whereby actually hour by hour you can see how this is landing, and you can restrict your targeting. So you can say, we're going to test this on 10,000 people versus 15 million people who are watching a TV advert. So it's just kind of making sure that people understand the formats, how quickly we can pull stuff in the digital age versus, you know, creating a poster that's going to be out and about everywhere and all the print costs that go with that.
Okay, perfect. Hopefully that answered your question, Coralie. And so we've got another one. Do you believe millennials and Gen Z need new kinds of communication?
Happy to go again. I think I think it's understanding their preferences in terms of channels and kind of where they are. So I think, you know, communication, yeah, I think, you know, you tweak language depending on who your audience is at all times. But for me, it's very much understanding where they are, and, you know, what are they digesting? Where can you place relevant kind of communications with that audience?
But to add to that, I hate it when I see brands who suddenly just lay themselves bare to a different audience. Like, you know, brands build themselves over time by standing for something and meaning something. And yes, of course, the way you talk to different audiences is incredibly important. But, you know, there's nothing worse than a brand that all of a sudden acts totally different to one audience when its core beliefs still remain the same. So I always think that's quite a challenge. I mean, some of the banking clients that we currently work with have got exactly that issue, and there's some very high net worth individuals involved as well, but very young high net worth individuals. And it is interesting to sort of strike that balance between, you know, being able to talk to people in a language they may understand, but then also retain the gravitas and the thoughtfulness in your communications that allow you to still, you know, convey the seriousness of the topic, but also the knowledge that the organisation has.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got one around COVID-19. How do you see the importance of compliance, specifically in the current pandemic, as market conditions can start changing?
Sorry, I didn't actually, you broke up. Can you repeat the question?
Sorry, yeah. How do you see the importance of compliance specifically within the current pandemic as market conditions start changing?
That's a tough one. Blimey, who wants that one? Caroline, any thoughts on that? That's a pretty tough one. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's just a new environment, isn't it, for all of us? We're still all trying to figure out what the world's going to be like, and I think, you know, we're all put down for a tricky period in an economic point of view.
I still think that it's a bit harsh, but the facts are still the facts, and I think the same. This is the boring sort of end of the line. So you can go with the creator. I get to the end of the day. We'd still be looking at the cold hard facts, and unfortunately that's what would happen in the event of a breach, or you know, if you're sued for something, or if you've got a complaint against you. The COVID-19 it wouldn't change the regulation requirements, unfortunately, unless you're doing something specifically related to COVID-19, and then obviously there might be differences on that. But broadly, if you were trying to clear something in January, and the same process would apply today.
And I think it's just watching that adaptability point, you know, to pick up on what Claire said, is that just because the COVID situation has changed things, you can't just adapt. You have to look at what that adaptation actually means. So are you setting off a chain reaction if you do this, or actually is it, you know, that it's just a slight pivot that still sits within those compliance. We're probably a little bit too early into our new normal to really know what that looks like. But that kind of fail fast point, I guess, yes, but with a little bit of a caveat of still sitting within the regulations and the compliance space.
Perfect. And then Al, I've got one for you. Some experience agencies use quality over quantity methodology to measure sentiment. What does the panel use? I think that one's more for Al.
Quality over quantity. Sorry, some companies use the quality over quantity
Methodology to measure sentiment and amplification. What do we use?
Blimey, that's a deep strategy question for 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. I mean, I don't have a simple answer to that one, to be honest. I think it entirely depends on the marketplace you're in, the brand that you are, and you know what your commercial expertise and experience is demanding of you as well. So, I mean, measuring sentiment is that's a tricky thing at the best of times, to be honest. So, unfortunately, I don't really have a concise answer. I'd probably have to go away and have a little think about that one, to be quite honest.
Is that more in relation to like VR, and because it's to do with experience agencies rather than social media campaigns? Is that what they meant, do you think? As in experience, as in they do small like VR events in public spaces rather than big campaigns?
Well, measuring brand sentiments and an established, and sorry, you know an awful lot about insurance, Claire, so I would never try to be like, brand sentiment is a well-established sort of measure of how people obviously perceive the brand and stuff across the marketing sort of realm. It's more of a question on that, but
Sorry.
quality versus quantity. Yeah, I think I'd have to have a little think about that one. That's quite a deep conversation.
Robert, we can get back to you on that one then. All right, so in the effort of finishing right on time, I'll wrap it up there. If there are any other questions, you can always email us. We can reach out to the panelists and make sure that they get answered for you. Just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time out. This was a great discussion, and I hope that all of the attendees learned something new. We do offer free content strategy workshops for anyone who attended our events. So what that means is if you do have a campaign that you're working on that is has some compliance restrictions on it, or just a campaign in general that you're looking and would like some support on, then we do offer these free workshops where we can sit together and kind of flesh that out with you, or guide you through that. So if you are interested in that, you can reach out and get in touch with me, or there's an email there on the screen, newbiz@nuccobrain.com. And that's everything from us. We hope you enjoyed this morning, and you will receive a link with feedback about the event later today. So we'd love to hear what you thought. Thank you to everyone, and have a great Wednesday.